Coming up on Network Africa, the recent rise in piracy off the Somali coast has been attributed to drought and famine ravaging the country. A South African man accused of murdering his parents and older brother with an axe in 2015 says he's innocent as the crime was committed by an intruder. And Ghana, Kenya and Malawi are the first countries that will test the world's first vaccine against malaria. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Temito Fagbemi. Let's begin with a look at stories that made headlines over the weekend.
Over the weekend, King Salman of Saudi Arabia welcomed Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi to Riyadh. The two leaders discussed their close relationship and the latest developments in the region. The visit came amidst heightened political tensions between the two major Arab states. An Italian-born conservationist, Cookie Gallman, was wounded by gunmen at her conservation park on Sunday, in the latest of a string of attacks during land invasions in the drought-stricken northern Kenya. A family friend said the 73-year-old author of the memoir, I Dreamed of Africa, was shot in the stomach after the vehicle she was driving in was ambushed by a group of gunmen. Before being attacked, Gallman was going to inspect fresh damage to her property after invaders set fire to a retreat there. Her family runs the Gallman Africa Conservancy and Gallman Memorial Foundation, conservation groups focusing on bringing people and wildlife together. The hopes of many Syrians have been shattered by the country's civil war, but one Syrian working in Egypt has not allowed the tragic conditions to hinder his dreams, as he aims to help inspire other refugees through his love of football. Anas Abu Jawad once played in one of the top Syrian teams and also enjoyed a stint playing in Cyprus. But his career went off course when civil war broke out in his home country. Anas took more coaching courses in Egypt and has worked as a youth coach in several academies. He established a football academy for Syrian refugees and called it the Syrian Stars Academy, which offers young Syrians the opportunities they otherwise would never have.
A top U.S. Army officer has attributed the recent rise in piracy off the Somali coast to the drought and famine ravaging the country. The head of U.S. Africa Command, General Thomas Waldhauser, says some of the vessels targeted were carrying food and oil. The U.S. Defense Secretary, James Mattis, has also expressed concerns about the resurgence of Somali piracy during a visit to the American military base in Djibouti. Mr. Mattis suggested commercial vessels should consider stepping up onboard security to guard against attacks at sea, saying the situation is being monitored, but there is no plan of an immediate response. Piracy was rampant off the Somali coast until increased patrols by European naval forces contained the problem. Morocco and Algeria have become embroiled in a diplomatic row over a group of Syrian refugees. The countries have summoned each other's ambassadors over the matter. On Friday, Morocco accused Algeria of inhumane behavior by forcing a group of more than 50 Syrians into its territory near the desert town of Figui. It also says Algeria is stirring up tension at the border. Algeria, however, rejects the accusation and says Morocco tried to expel the group towards its borders. It is not clear where the Syrians are now. The director of the Human Rights Division of the United Nations in South Sudan, UNREST, Eugene Nidorera, is on a 3-day trip to WAU to assess the current situation in the area. He's visiting neighborhoods that have been deserted as civilians flee fighting and ethnic targeted killings. Civil war broke out in oil-producing South Sudan in 2013 after President Salva Kiir sacked Riek Machar from the vice presidency.
The UN Human Rights Director in South Sudan, Eugene Nidorera, has said abuses on civilians and aid workers must be brought to an end in the country. Nidorera was speaking while on a tour to investigate atrocities in the world's youngest nation. War in South Sudan erupted when the president fired his deputy in 2013, sparking a confrontation between two of the country's largest ethnic groups. That conflict ended in a peace pact in 2015, and Machar was reinstated early last year, but tensions between the two men lingered and finally erupted into new fighting in July. Ndorera was on a 3-day trip inspecting neighborhoods that have been deserted as a result of fighting and ethnic targeted killings. He also visited a hospital and camps for the displaced.
We went to the hospital to see some of the victims, and of course it's difficult to hear their stories, and especially when we have to think about how it has to be addressed, because it's about accountability, and in the context of South Sudan we know that the impunity is really one of the big challenges of this country.
Ndorera has said that people who have sought shelter in UN protection of civilian sites remain in difficult conditions, and many of their homes have been looted. The United Nations estimates about 3 million South Sudanese have been uprooted by the violence in their country, the biggest cross-border exodus in Africa since the 1994 Rwandan genocide.
Over the past week, as a direct result of the upsurge of violence in WOW, some 17,000 people have taken refuge at the protection of civilian sites in WOW town, bringing the total number seeking protection in that site to some 42,000 people. In central Equatoria, since the beginning of 2017, conflict has caused massive displacements from Katukeji and elsewhere in the region. In Upper Nile, clashes on the West Bank in late January and February forced some 30,000 people to flee while Shuluk and the surrounding area.
Meanwhile, violence against aid workers is becoming increasingly common in the oil-rich country, which is also suffering the world's first famine for 6 years. Since the civil war began, 82 aid workers have been killed.
We have seen, especially in WOW, where aid workers were killed. This is not going to happen because basically they are here to support people who are in need, and it's not really acceptable to see that they can be killed like they were killed in WOW. So there is a lot of issues. The issue for me is really how do we prioritize some of the solutions.
In recent weeks, fighting has engulfed towns in the southern Equatoria region, where fleeing civilians say government troops have